All right, everyone, you're welcome back again to my YouTube channel. In case you are a returning subscriber, thank you very much, and I appreciate your support. Your comments, your like has been a kind of encouragement to me. And of course, if you are new to this channel is strictly meant for the discussion of music theory. So different areas of music theory, we discuss them here, and I try as much as possible to simplify this area so that it becomes very clearing to everyone, right? Even though you are a beginner or you are advanced in music, this class actually cater for all your needs, right? If you're new here, click the subscribe button, subscribe to this channel, like my videos, and of course, drop a comment if you have a question from any area of music you want us to treat. You can just drop them in the comment section and I'll pick it up from there, right? If you go back into my channel, you'll see that I've done several videos in the past bordering on scale, chords, time signature, key signature, different aspects of music theory. So I've done some videos on these areas. All right, so your support is very, very important, and thank you as you click this subscribe button. Okay, so in our last class, we talked about the inversion of chords. We talked about how to invert the basic chords, as the chord that has a root, the third, and the fifth. Basically, we talk about how to invert or how to rearrange the notes of these chords. So today, we want to go deeper into another aspect of chord inversion, and we want to talk about how to invert the extended chords, chord with the seventh. So let's dive right into it. All right, so in this class, we're going to talk about the inversion of the seventh chord, and of course, we're going to talk about how this can be represented by using the figure base, right? So we're going to use figures to represent these inversions, right? Okay, so in the last class, talking about how to represent the basic chords, we said that when you see 5-3, that is 5 up and 3 down, then it means the chord is in root position, right? And when you see 6-3, so it shows that the chord is a first inversion chord, or simply 6, right? So when you see 6 written below a chord, it shows that the chord is in its first inversion, right? Okay, when you have 6-4, it shows that that chord is in its second inversion, right? We have 5-3 for root position chord, 6-3 or simply 6 as the first inversion, and we have 6-4 as the second inversion. That is talking about chords in its basic form. That is the simple chord, 3-note chords, right? You see this arrangement in my previous video. You can click on this link above to watch the full video, right? Having said that, let's talk about how to invert the seventh chord. Seventh, so it shows that the chord has an extension, has a seventh above the fifth. In other words, it is a 4-note chord, different from the simple chord, which has just 3 notes. So we want to talk about a 4-note chord. That is the seventh chord. And of course, the first one that we have in front of us is the root position chord, which is the seventh. All right, so we have this chord as a root position chord. So for the benefit of those who can't read the staff notation, you can have this chord as this, right, on the piano. So we have F, A, C, and E flats, right? So we have this chord. How do you name this? Simply, this is a seventh chord. So you can call it F7, right? Or the fifth chord on B flat major, right? So that's exactly what you have here. Now let's talk about how to name this chord using the figured base. Now you can name it this way, that is 7-5-3. Why? Why is it 753? Now let's look at the chords combination or the interval between the notes that make up the chord. All right, so you have from the first note here, which is F, to E flat. It's a seventh, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 7. So that's the reason for the top 7 figure, right? Now let's look at 5. Of course, from F to C is a fifth, right? Now for the 3, you have from F again, that's the bass. From the bass to the third, right, is simply 3. So that's why we have 753, right? But you can simply reduce this to just seventh, right? Instead of saying 5753 chord, and just say 5/7 chord, right? So you know that it's just a seventh chord. So simply 5/7. So you have 5/7 on B flat major as this, right? If you invert this chord, what do you have? So the first inversion will look like this, right? Remember that seventh chord always comes with dissonance sound. Of course, you can also represent it this way for the keyboardist, right? So you have A, C, E flat, and F. So how do you represent this in the figured bass? If you know the answer, just drop it in the comment section. All right, now let's try to do that together. So it's 653, and of course it's 6 because the outer pitches has the interval of a 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? And of course from this to this is a fifth, from this to this is a third. Okay, so you see the reason why interval is actually very important in the discussion of harmony. So I suggest you go back to this link video and watch all the lessons on intervals. Okay, let's go back to our discussion. So when you look at it, you see that it's also very ambiguous, right? So instead of calling it 5653 chord, so you can easily compress it to 6/5 chord, right? So 5/6/5 chord, 5/6/5 chord will sound as this, right? Remember, you can actually build it on any key, but in this context, we are building it on B flat major. So it means if we want to build it on C major, it's going to be E, G, B, and C, right? You can also invert this further, right? So that you have the second inversion, right? So the second inversion will look like this. Again, we're taking the bass note from the previous inversion, from the first inversion up. So invariably, the lowest pitch is the bass note, right? The deepest pitch, so it's the bass note. We're taking it forward. So that's basically what the inversion is all about. So again, you can just check this link video for more explanation on inversion. All right, now let's continue. So the second inversion is going to be C, E flat, F, and A, right? And of course, it's going to look like this: C, E flat, F, and A, right? It's going forward now. The A is going forward, but previously it was here, right? A was down, right, in the first inversion, but we're moving it forward an octave, right? So that's what the inversion is all about. taking the bass upwards an octave, right? Okay, so that we have another arrangement and another feel of the chord. All right, now how do you name this? Again, if you know the answer, you can just write it in the comment section, right? And again, let's try to answer the questions together. All right, so you have it as this 6-4-3, and that is called 5-6-4-3. So it's talking about the second inversion of a seventh chord, right? Usually, in most cases, you don't see this chord written as this. Okay, so usually in most cases, you see it being written as this 5-4-3. Let's do a little recap. The root position of a seventh chord is simply seventh, and the first inversion is 6-5, right? And the second inversion now is 4-3, right? So you have 7-6-5-4-3, right? Now you can have the third inversion. Remember while discussing the basic chord, the simple chord, we only have first inversion and the second inversion. I told you, if you could remember, that when you try to invert it further, you go back to the root position again. But in this case, since we have 4 notes, so we can now have the third inversion. Of course, we're taking the lowest note here, which is C. We're taking it upwards. So when we do that, then we have E flat, F, A, and C. So that's the third inversion. And of course, it's written this way: E flat, F, A, and C. Right? So how do you name it? Again, you can leave the answer in the comment section. Okay, let's try to answer the questions together. So it's 6-4-2, right? And it's so because of the interval between them. So from the first note here to the last note, remember, this is not necessarily the root. F still remains the root. F is the root of the chord. It's just that now the chord has been rearranged. But it is correct to say this is the bass because E flat has the deepest pitch in this whole arrangement. So if that's the case, from E flat to C is a sixth, and that's why we have 6 here. And from E flat again to A is 4 notes, dissonance, right? And from E flat again to F is a second, right? So that's why we have 2 here, right? Good. But again, this chord is not usually written this way, right? So how do you write it? So you can write it simply as 4-2 or just 2. So we're coming from naming this chord as seventh. Then we have 6-5, which is the first inversion of a seventh chord. We have 4-3, that's the second inversion. And now we have just 2 or 4-2 as the third inversion. All right, so always remember this, because if you're a classical musician, or if you're a classical music student or a music theory student, you come across this a lot when you're dealing with harmony in general. So in summary, taking everything all together, remember, if it's a simple chord, you call the root position 5-3, right? If it is the first inversion of a simple chord, then you call it 6-3, right? Or simply 6. And if it is the second inversion of a simple chord, then you call it the 6-4 chord, right? Now, when you progress further into the extended chords, as a seventh chord now, you see that the root position of a seventh chord is simply 7, right? That's why we have the 7-6-3 chord, right? Or simply you can just call it the seventh chord. And the first inversion of the seventh chord is the 6-5, right? And the second inversion is 4-3, right? And the third inversion of a seventh chord is simply 2 or 4/2, right? All right, everyone, we've come to the end of this section on the inversion of extended chords and, of course, how to name them using the figured bass. If you have any question, you can put them in the comment section. And if you want a personalized music lessons like music theory lesson, you can contact me through my email and I'll pick it up from there. And of course, I'll see you in the next one.